Make sure that's going so we can post it later. Perfect. Okay, so we're excited. You are all here to enjoy the third webinar of this four-part series brought to you by Sublette BOCES and the Sublette County Conservation District. As I mentioned, a recorded version of this webinar will be available on the SCCD and BOCES website shortly if you would like to view again or share with anyone you know that was unable to make it today. We'd also love to hear from you, so please write down any questions you have throughout the presentation, and then we can all unmute at the end to do a Q&A session with Shari. So keep those questions in mind, and I guess until then, just try to remain muted so that we can all hear the presentation throughout. And with that, I would like to introduce today's presenter. Shari Meeks is the Range Program Manager for SCCD. She gets plenty of windshield time throughout the year as she commutes from Bondurant and travels throughout the county on a variety of projects. Over the years, Shari has grown to notice subtle changes on the landscape, which is where her expertise in landscape ecology and understanding the role of soils and geology has influenced the SCCD's contribution to rangeland monitoring and management in Sublette County. The Sagebrush Sea may look the same across the landscape through your windshield. So let's join Shari as she helps us hone our eye into the diverse sagebrush landscape that surrounds us. So with that, I will let Shari take it away.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, Jess. And it'll just take me just a second to share my screen. All righty. Well, as we're all pretty much aware, the Sagebrush Sea is very vast in the western United States. In that map that just popped up, the green represents sagebrush coverage. And now when we just zoom into Wyoming, the brown indicates that sagebrush can be found on at least 2/3 of the landscapes in our state. Sagebrush can actually grow under many different conditions and is very well adapted to the climatic changes and elevation ranges that vary across the state of Wyoming. Today, however, we want to focus on our sagebrush here in Sublette County. And to do so, I've enlisted a few of my range colleagues to help me, and I'll introduce them as we go. By the end of our 30 minutes together, it's my hope that you are exposed to the different characteristics of sagebrush and how different species of sagebrush can actually indicate to us things such as soil type or annual precipitation. We'll look at identification of a few of our dominant sagebrush species in Sublette County, and then we'll also talk about the role of sagebrush as it promotes diversity of all kinds here in our home county. At 70 miles an hour, the Sagebrush Sea may all just look the same to you, but actually across the state of Wyoming, there are several species of sagebrush, and you can find over half of them right here in Sublette County. Let's see what my range professional colleague, Paul Myman, has to say about sagebrush landscapes in Wyoming.
One thing that we humans are really bad about is generalizing. Most of the time when we say or hear the word sagebrush, it would be easy to assume that there is only one kind of sagebrush, and nothing could be further from the truth. Here in wonderful Wyoming, we have 13 different kinds of sagebrush. Some are tall, like this basin big sagebrush that grows in deep, well-drained soils of valley bottoms. Some are small, like this low sagebrush that grows on shallow soils or rocky soils, or maybe windswept ridges. Others are medium-sized and can thrive in the hottest, driest spots on up to much cooler and wetter sites at higher elevations. Wherever you go in Wyoming, you are bound to find one or more of our 13 kinds of sagebrush that is well adapted to growing there. You might hear that sagebrush is a sign of overgrazing by domestic livestock. Whoa, buddy, be careful with that one. In some specific locations, livestock grazing may be one factor that has led to an increase in the density of sagebrush plants, but on any general or regional scale, sagebrush still grows where it's been growing for a long time. Sagebrush is well adapted to life here in Wyoming, and those adaptations were in place millions of years before livestock entered the picture. From the University of Wyoming Cooperative Extension Service, I'm Paul Myman.
All right, thank you, Paul. So let's bring it down to Sublette County. This photo is taken down in the southwestern part of our county, and I just love this picture because it shows just how diverse the landscape is. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes, actually not minutes, but seconds, and just let you look at this picture. And I'm going to ask you just how many different species of sagebrush do you see in the sea? So if you guessed at least 4 or 5, give yourself a pat on the back, because there are probably more in the photo, but what I want you to know is that it is quite common on our landscape to see several different sagebrush species when you turn 360 degrees standing in one spot. So let's see if we can just dig into this just a little bit deeper. This is a list of 9 sagebrush species that are commonly found in Sublette County. Each species loves certain things about our landscape, whether it be soil type, hydrology, or annual precipitation. So if you pay close attention and you learn to correctly identify sagebrush species, they can tell you quite the story about Sublette County's soils. So let's start with an overview about the common attributes of sagebrush species. Have you ever been traveling along a 2-track and noticed a strong aromatic smell on the landscape? Or have you gone for a stroll on the range right after a rainstorm and noticed that sweet smell of sagebrush? Sagebrush is quite fragrant, which sets it apart from other plants on our landscape. The leaves of sagebrush emit a strong, pungent, turpentine-like odor thanks to its high content of aromatic essential oils. There are 2 other attributes that can help set sagebrush species apart from one another. Growth habit can vary from species to species. Some sagebrush can grow almost tree-like, where others can lay close to the ground or anywhere in between. Sagebrush plants produce wedge-shaped leaves that are divided into 3 lobes near the tip. Looking at the pictures on the right, the veins within the leaves will vary, and then the spaces in between the fingers will also vary. Some can be deeply lobed while others are not. In fact, there are some species of sagebrush that don't have any lobes at all. The leaves tend to be covered with fine silvery hairs, and leaves can be seen on the bush all year round, even though sagebrush does shed part of its leaves during the late summer. Are you having trouble visualizing all of this? Well, here are some of the photos of different species of sagebrush and a photo of the growth habit that best matches the species. You will see in the upper left-hand corner, basin big sagebrush can be quite tall, tree-like, where the 2 pictures in the upper right-hand corner are our low-growing species, and the 2 photos in the bottom center are the most common sagebrush form, where it looks more bush-like. The photos on the left show us that sagebrush color can vary slightly from species to species. Some are gray, some silvery green, and others have more of an evergreen color to them. How about a few more fun facts? Sagebrush is a perennial evergreen shrub and has a large taproot, which can absorb water from as deep as 13 feet. Sagebrush also forms several lateral roots that are located close to the surface of the ground, designed for absorption of rainfall. The leaves, fruit, and seed of sagebrush are all edible. They represent important source of food for the mammals that eat them, such as pygmy rabbits, mule deer, pronghorn, and birds, such as the greater sage grouse. Have you ever seen the grape-like growths on the sagebrush plant? These are called galls, which are tumor-like growth of plant tissue triggered by an insect. The plant gall grows quickly in response to that invading insect. The plant, it provides all that the insect needs for water, food, and shelter, usually without causing harm to the host plant, in this case, sagebrush. Because galls are often specific in shape, color, and size, an observer can easily identify the kind of gall-inducing insect just by looking at the gall itself. Not only all of these things, but sagebrush is a perennial plant that can survive over 100 years in the wild. So now that we've learned a few defining attributes of sagebrush, let's look at what sagebrush species can be an indicator of. Starting with annual precipitation. In Sublette County, resource specialists will often refer to 4 categories of precipitation as listed in the box on the left. Species such as Wyoming big sagebrush can live in drier regions, but as you move up into the mountains, Wyoming big sagebrush tends to fade out and mountain big sagebrush becomes more dominant, just as one example. Sagebrush can also hint at site hydrology. Some species of sagebrush can actually tolerate more water than other species. For example, silver sagebrush can be found in the higher elevation sites near springs or where water tends to flow over the landscape, where basin big sagebrush is commonly found in our ephemeral drainages in the desert regions of Sublette County, again in locations where water accumulates but doesn't last long. Some sagebrush are specific to soil attributes. Some sagebrush love clay and some love salt. Altogether, these site attributes can indicate productivity potential for any particular site, and they can also be an indicator of what grasses or forbs you would likely see in the understory. Let's look at a specific example before we move on to sagebrush ID. So to understand site potential, we're going to compare Wyoming big sagebrush and mountain big sagebrush. The plant community on the left is mountain big sagebrush. Its understory is comprised of a wide variety of grasses and forbs and has access to more water throughout the growing season in general. This plant community is in our regions where we're having higher precipitation, and so it can produce well over 2,000 pounds per acre of total plant production in any given year. While Wyoming big sagebrush plant communities, which are in the picture on the right, we would expect to see different understory grasses and forbs as compared to the mountain big sage plant community. And we would also have much different site potential as its access to water is more limited, expecting less than 1,000 pounds per acre of total plant productivity on any given year. So even though sagebrush has the ability to indicate a lot, it is always good practice to dig a soil pit, make certain of your sagebrush ID, or even do some further investigation into the plant community if you're trying to gain a deeper understanding of the location that you're interested. So let's now take a look at a few different species found here in Sublette County. To help teach about these species, I've enlisted Sublette County NRCS range specialist Karen Claus to assist me with some of the sagebrush ID. Our first species to identify is basin big sagebrush, which are the tree-like sagebrush species generally found in well-drained ephemeral drainages of Sublette County, in areas where annual precipitation is generally less than 14 inches. Typically, where basin big sagebrush grows, there is a little more water throughout the year than neighboring benches and slopes. So, Karen, how would we differentiate this sagebrush from others when it isn't a tree yet? Whoop. Sorry about that.
We're looking at basin big sagebrush, Artemisia tridentata, subspecies tridentata. The defining characteristics of this plant, other than its tall growth form, we're looking at an immature 5-year-old plant here, but the defining characteristics on the leaf are a long, more linear shaped leaf and veins that run down the 3 lobes that join midway down the leaf before combining into one single vein that runs the remainder of the length of the leaf.
So not only does basin big sagebrush tell us characteristics about the landscape, but it's also a nice place to find some shade in the midsummer heat. So let's check out black sagebrush, a sagebrush that has leaves that are darker green than any other species of sagebrush. Black sage is highly drought tolerant and is often found on dry microsites such as the west or south facing slopes, usually in shallow, rocky, calcareous soils. During the growing season, water is generally from rainstorm events. So do you see the white in the soil pit at the top of the screen? That is calcium carbonate or salt found in our soils. Black sagebrush can tolerate high amounts of salt that is in our soil. So Karen, how would we identify this sagebrush on the landscape?
Here we're looking at black sage. Black sage is Artemisia nova. The distinguishing characteristics of this plant is its short growth form and short stature. It's considered one of the dwarf sagebrushes. It has some distinct glandular dotting when looking at the leaves under a hand lens, as well as after crushing the leaves, a very sticky feeling on your fingers afterward. It also has these brown seed stalks that persist from the previous year that is distinctly brown, as opposed to other sagebrushes where it is gray or they do not persist.
So in summary, this is a very green, very sticky, low-growing sagebrush plant, somewhat dissimilar to our basin big sagebrush that we learned about just a few minutes ago. All right. Next on our list is early sagebrush, another one of our dwarf sagebrush species here in Sublette County. Early sage is a gray-green color and flowers early in the spring, hence the name early sagebrush. Typically, we see early sagebrush associated with the foothills of the Wyoming range, or even in areas of high clay within our basin. Typically, early sagebrush will not grow taller than 2 feet and often lacks an apparent trunk. The leaves are deeply lobed, which makes this species of sagebrush in Sublette County stand out a little more than the others. Because early sagebrush can withstand a variety of precipitation ranges, it also has a wide expectation of plant productivity, mostly limited by annual rainfall. Wyoming big sagebrush is by far the most populous sagebrush in the central regions of Sublette County and can tolerate a lot of different soil types. However, it favors soils with little to no salt in the top 6 to 12 inches of the soil profile. Like early sagebrush, Wyoming sagebrush can withstand a variety of precipitation ranges, and it also has a wide expectation of plant productivity, also limited mostly by rainfall. So let's hear from Karen again to see how we could distinguish Wyoming big sagebrush from others.
We're looking at Wyoming big sagebrush, Artemisia tridentata subspecies wyomingensis. The defining characteristics for this plant, other than its growth form, which is a shorter, more mushroom-shaped plant, is looking at the leaves. They should be, when looking at the persistent leaves, they should be a distinct bell shape as opposed to linear shape with the 3 lobes, and there should be veins that run down each lobe that join at the very base of the lobe where it comes in.
Alrighty, last but certainly not least is mountain big sagebrush, which grows at our mid to high elevations throughout our western mountains. It can be distinguished by height and habit and also by its smell. The leaves are pungently aromatic due to the high phenolic and coumarin content in the leaves, making it one of the most palatable of all the subspecies of sagebrush. It is of extraordinary importance for wildlife habitat. Characteristically, it grows with other shrubs and a high diversity of grass species, typically in places where winter snow is plentiful. It can be common to misidentify Wyoming big sagebrush with mountain. Karen, can you please tell us what to look for to identify mountain big sage?
Today we're looking at mountain big sagebrush, Artemisia tridentata, subspecies vasiana. Mountain big sage defining characteristics are its distinct cake top, like a birthday cake with candles, appearance of the inflorescence on the plant. In addition, the leaves are more long and linear, such as in basin big sage. However, those leaf veins continue on the backside of the leaf and don't join all the way until the base of the leaf.
All right, we have one more fun fact. In dry sites, mountain big sagebrush is known to hybridize with Wyoming sagebrush. In these habitats, positive identification can be really difficult. For that reason, land managers often rely on what is known as the black light test. To distinguish the high coumarin mountain sagebrush, which fluoresces bright blue when you take the flowering branches and crush them up and put them in water, whereas Wyoming big sagebrush does not fluoresce when you crush up the leaves and put them in water. Hybrids, however, will have like a pale blue inflorescence, making the lines between hybrids and then the parents nearly impossible to draw. However, the blacklight test can really help us in the field distinguish the difference between mountain and Wyoming. All right, now that we've spent some time learning how to identify some very common sagebrush species in Sublette County, and we have learned where they like to live on the landscape. So remember this photo from the beginning of the presentation? Let's take a little closer look. Here we have mountain big sage, a photo of the landscape, and then also the little yellow circle on the left side of your screen indicates a typical location of where we would find mountain. Black sagebrush is on our droughtier slopes, we learned, and it has, if you look closely at the picture, you should see some little black dots on the landscape, and that's very characteristic of black sagebrush. Early sagebrush on our shoulders, and Wyoming big sagebrush on kind of those flatter areas in the basin. So we have covered a lot, but we're going to switch gears just a little bit. So up to this point, we have learned about sagebrush attributes, different types of sagebrush species in Sublette County, and how they can be an indicator of other pieces to the ecological puzzle. But why is all that important? Well, sagebrush play a unique role in our ecosystems here in Sublette County and throughout the West. So we're going to hear from another colleague, Barton Stam from the University of Wyoming, who can help to elaborate a little bit more regarding sagebrush's importance on our landscape.
Sagebrush. Its distinctive scent permeates Wyoming's air, and its foliage provides the distinctive grayish hue to many of our landscapes. Basin big sagebrush is the biggest species in the Cowboy State. Almost 2/3 of Wyoming is populated by sage. It is the naturally dominant or climax species on much of that ground. Sagebrush prospers where there is winter snow, and it helps perpetuate itself by intercepting blowing snow, creating mini drifts, and using the water when they melt. Most sagebrush is knee to waist high, but the basin big sagebrush subspecies can grow to nearly tree-like stature in ravines or other favorable places. Sagebrush is an essential food and habitat requirement for deer, antelope, sage grouse, and many other wildlife species, especially in winter. You can imagine how this would create superb winter cover. Love it or hate it, sagebrush is the quintessential Wyoming plant. From the University of Wyoming Cooperative Extension Service, I'm Barton Stam, exploring the nature of Wyoming.
As Barton alluded to, sagebrush itself is a keystone plant. Sagebrush ecosystems provide important food and cover, especially winter habitat for big game species and other wildlife. Wyoming big sagebrush is also regarded as a crucial food item for sage grouse, black-tailed jackrabbits, and pygmy rabbits, and mature sagebrush cover is important for sage grouse broods. Did you know that the protein level and digestibility of sagebrush are typically greater during the winter than other shrub and herbaceous plants? And here's another fun fact. We learned earlier that the characteristic smell of sagebrush is the result of the essential oils such as terpenes, which serve actually as a chemical defense mechanism for the plant to limit herbivory. Consequently, wildlife species such as pronghorn and sage grouse that ingest large quantities of sagebrush have actually developed very efficient digestive systems to cope with those large quantities of terpenes. Barton mentioned that sagebrush captures snow. In the winter, sagebrush is commonly the only green vegetation that rises above the snow. So not only does this increase its forage value for wildlife, but the comparatively tall stature of sagebrush and stiff twigs actually capture snow, which increases our ability to retain water throughout the summer. There's picture on the left is one that I took just a few weeks ago when we still had snow that shows a close-up of snow capture in Sublette County. And sagebrush can also maintain species diversity on the landscape just by protecting grasses and forb species from large ungulate herbivory. The picture on the right shows how there isn't much cover for grass and forbs in the inner spaces, as you can see with the blue arrow. However, this sagebrush plant has actually prevented foragers from plucking out all the grasses and forbs, as pointed by the red arrow, thus keeping the seeds of important grasses and forbs on the landscape. According to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, Wyoming State Wildlife Action Plan, sagebrush ecosystems in Wyoming not only support crucial habitats for some of the largest migratory populations of ungulates in North America, but also offer the best chance to sustain healthy populations of sage-grouse and other sagebrush-dependent species. There are several sagebrush obligate species, or those species that require sagebrush to live, such as the sage sparrow, brewer's sparrow, sage thrasher, sage grouse, pygmy rabbit, sagebrush vole, and the sagebrush lizard. Several other species depend on the habitat that sagebrush provides during different times of the year. Elk, mule deer, and pronghorn are the primary wild ungulates that utilize sagebrush habitat in our county, and biologists actually believe that pronghorn attain their highest population densities in our sagebrush ecosystems. The Sublette County Conservation District is among the many groups working hard to collaborate with all users of public lands and all landowners in Sublette County. On a daily basis, we collaborate with local, state, and federal agencies, as well as non-government groups and private landowners to manage rangelands that are healthy and support diversity. The sage grouse has done a great work in bringing attention to the necessity of our sagebrush steppe ecosystem. For that reason, I really want to share you this video as it depicts the grander values of our Sagebrush Sea. This video was filmed by the Fish and Wildlife Service right here in Sublette County. So let's take a look. So as we have learned today, sometimes sagebrush can get overlooked at 70 miles an hour. We can get pretty bored looking at the sage green landscape that seems endless and vast. But within the sagebrush sea lies secrets to how it helps our landscape function properly and uniquely to support diversity among the plants and animals that call this place home. The Sagebrush Sea gives us a unique place to recreate and live here in Sublette County. Well, our time is up. I hope that I achieved the goal to lend you an understanding of the different characteristics of sagebrush and how sagebrush can be an indicator of precipitation, site hydrology, soils, and plant community productivity. I hope that you've learned identifying characteristics for just a few of our local favorites here in Sublette County and gained an appreciation for the role of sagebrush as it promotes diversity of all kinds here in Sublette County. I am happy to take any questions that you might have.
So yeah, you guys can feel free to unmute and ask questions. It looks like Bettina has her hand up. So do you have the first question? Oh, Bettina, we couldn't really hear you. Do you want to try that again?
Okay, is that better?
It's still pretty muffled.
Okay, let me turn my speaker down. Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, give it a go. We'll just have to turn our volume up.
I'm just saying I've never seen a sagebrush vole or sagebrush lizard. Where might I see those animals?
Was that you've never seen a sagebrush vole or lizard?
Correct.
Yeah, I know there's lots of different wildlife that are, I guess, obligate species to sagebrush here within Sublette County. I have honestly never seen a vole, but I have seen some of those like little desert horny toads and things like that out in the sagebrush.
Oh, it's showing.
Okay. Second question, if I can.
I didn't catch that.
Open a share tree.
May I ask another question?
Sure.
I have wondered if you can core, like you would core a tree to determine its age, if you can actually core some of the larger sagebrush plants and determine their age.
I've heard that you can age sagebrush similar to trees, but I've never tried it, and I don't really have any more information about aging sagebrush. I'm sorry, I can't give you a good idea about aging them.
Okay, it looks like Pete also has a question, so go for it. And whenever you're not asking a question, just be sure to mute so that everybody can hear, okay?
This is Pete. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Up at when the Roosevelt fire went through our properties, we lost maybe 20 acres of sagebrush, and I see nothing coming back on its own. What should I expect in the future?
I think you will see, well, depending on burn severity, it'll take a little bit of time for regeneration. So those plant communities up in the Roosevelt burn, like especially the sagebrush plant communities and things like that, they go through their own sort of evolutionary cycle. So they're going to start with what we call early cereal species. So more likely you're going to have a lot of grasses and forbs that are going to establish quicker. Sagebrush species, they might already be growing, but they're only going to be maybe an inch tall. In some cases, they are very slow growing. And depending on where you are in the ranches, you have varying types of sagebrush up there. There's mountain big sage and early, actually, on some of your slopes that are higher in clay. But regardless, I think for the first several years, you're going to see a lot more grasses and forbs. And over time, and we're talking a long period of time, our landscapes evolve slowly. They're not necessarily, our native plant communities are not like quick to, especially sagebrush, come back. It takes time. But you will see those grasses and forbs quickly. You should.
I think we had heard 30 years. Is that about right?
I would say that that's not wrong.
That's okay.
But at the aspen are already 4 feet tall.
You bet. You bet. So aspen are actually, fire actually excites aspen to grow. So when it is a response of that plant. Whereas sagebrush, if it burns, you either need to have a seed source, or depending on the timing of the burn, sometimes sagebrush can come back from its stem, but in some cases it can't. It really depends on where that sagebrush plant was in its growth for that year, or active growth is metabolizing. Like if it was actually actively metabolizing, different plants might actually be able to come back. But in many cases, sagebrush has to sprout from seed. And so that said, in the Roosevelt area or region, the sagebrush is going to be a slower comeback as compared to aspen, grasses, and forbs.
Right. May I ask another question? This is Sandy.
You bet.
Can sagebrush reflect human presence historically by its growth, size, or density? I had always heard anthropologically that sagebrush that is exhibiting a larger size and maybe denser grouping or something might represent that a native village was there, native campsite, something like that.
So the answer is yes. Humans have been on the landscape for a very, very, very long time. And we've also been manipulating the landscape for our benefit for a very long time. So historically, even Native Americans in the past have used fire to move and manipulate habitats for animals, to attract them or to move them or what have you. And the same can be said for even current day management. So humans on the landscape, we like to promote understory growth in many cases, and we don't want to conserve sagebrush necessarily in the densities that it is, depending on your management goals for your property. So in some cases, people have mowed sagebrush in order to promote that understory, or mowed sagebrush in order to promote sagebrush germination or even leader growth on sagebrush. And so the reality is that, yes, you can learn a lot from sagebrush size and stature to reflect like whatever humans have done on that property. But I also think you would have to have some sort of knowledge into historic management or treatment of those areas. So in Sublette County, we do, when we write these, what they call ecological site descriptions, we look into the history of herbivory in Sublette County. So for example, the Oregon Trail, and from the times of when we were acquiring the land out west here, you know, we look into the history of Lewis and Clark and what did they know, and all of those things in order to get a better understanding of how our plant communities have transitioned over time based off of use by man as one component to that transition. Does that make sense?
Does. Yes, it does. Thank you. That's very interesting.
You bet.
Yeah, it looks like we have another question from Annalise, so go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I've been looking into doing some antelope bitter brush, and it has another name on here as black sage. Now, from my understanding, those are not the same plants. Is that correct?
No, they are two very different plants.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have any other questions out there? Feel free. Okay, well, I think Shari's got one last slide maybe on there.
Yep.
All right, well, I guess thanks for coming, everyone. Just so you all know, we have one more webinar in this series. It will be on May 19th at the same time, and that one's going to cover actually one of the conservation plans that went into effect here in our office and some of the on-the-ground conservation work and stories from that specific ranch, which is the Ryegrass Ranch. So if you would like to join us for that one, we would love to have you. And with that, I thank you. And this will be up on the website, hopefully by the end of the week. So if you want to share it with others that weren't able to make it today, or go back to review some of those great identification, videos, feel free. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.